Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Adventures in DevOps. I'm the host of the show, Will Button. Joining me once again in the studio, my co-host and CTO of Authoress, Warren Parad. What's going on, Warren?
Hey, Will, thanks for having me back again, and looking forward to today's chat. But before we get there, I did promise a fact, and this one still is quite surprising for me that my CEO figured out that 1 in 5 security breaches of data, ransomware, for example, are reported. Only 1 in 5. So that's for every 5 that are out there that attack an organization where they get their data encrypted and insurance comes in and helps them or an external organization. 4 of those we never find out about, are never fully reported. We know about them because insurance does come in. There are other organizations that do report this information. And this is the ones that actually affect being able to change the data. So, go in and steal your YouTube credentials and go and post videos in your name. And this doesn't even, as soon as you get to the point of just data exposure, it becomes so prominent and difficult to identify. How do you know you actually leaked real data? That we have no idea how widespread that problem actually is.
Yeah, that's wild.
I know, right?
And I was just thinking, if it happened to me, would I report it or not?
Running a business, you mean?
Yeah.
Wow. So my next week, this will actually be my pick too, but maybe I'll spoil a little bit. But next week at DevOps Day Zurich, my CEO will be talking about this. And one of the stats she found was that if you leak your data to the internet and people find out about it, and then there's news reporting, your company value, the revenue, will actually increase. And that's because it's an advertisement, really. Hey, this is a thing. We are a company. If you didn't know about us, now you do. And if you're concerned, now you get one of those awesome emails into your inbox saying, wow, we really care about security. We're going to do something about this. And we're going to change how we're doing it. And that's really the message you send. And then these companies, they actually increase their sales.
That's funny because we were just talking about that before we started recording the episode, that negative publicity is actually good publicity. And I guess that just reinforces what we were talking about there.
Yeah, I don't want to live into that claim, but realistically, it's something that we have to deal with. And then there's really the question of what is the ROI on any particular action and whatnot. And the regulations that are supposed to protect us from companies that are negligent, usually, or even malicious, that are taking our data and intentionally selling it, those fines don't usually come out to be enough to justify. So it's quite surprising, really, the state of the industry.
I think there's a whole new twisted evil marketing campaign there of advertising fake data breaches to increase revenue.
I mean, I'm with you. The problem is that if you could intelligently and actually get increased retention or new customers to your service or product by posting this, then you would know how to do advertisement correctly. And so really you're just talking about, how do I make a viral campaign? And that campaign could be, oops, we spilled our credentials and now you know about the company. It could also be, hey, come use our free product. And then we sell you the freemium model where in order to get anything. So yeah, for sure. Someone could be using it more effectively that way.
Yeah. And it seems like there's probably a limited number of times you can play the oops, we got hacked card to increase revenue.
Wow, you say that, and now I'm wondering what the result really is there. I mean, there are some companies that I won't name that seem like every single month there's a security breach or some other security incident. So a major, I will not name company that has stock, public company, and are also in the cloud business, and I keep wondering, if it's not a huge impact to their actual customers, does just rattling this off? And so the question I keep asking a lot of my fellow CTOs out there is, how many data breaches does a SaaS product or a third-party partner that you have to go through before you decide, hey, we can't partner with you anymore? It's actually potentially damaging to our brand, or we're actually concerned for regulations or what our users will think of us.
Right. Yeah. It kind of, oh, never mind. I shouldn't say that on air. So anyway, speaking of your fellow CTOs, that brings us to today's topic, because I want to talk to you as a CTO about how you think about DevOps. And just to set the context of this conversation a little bit, I've been doing this for multiple decades, and a recurring theme that has come up throughout my career has been from the employee perspective. It seems like we never get time to do OS updates or patches or clean up technical debt. And even like when it comes to writing code, I've talked with many people, far too many, that say, yeah, my boss doesn't want me to write tests for my code because it takes too much time. And as I've gone through my career, I've kind of put together this philosophy that that's not actually the case. It's a lot more about perception than reality. Like, I don't think there's very many people in a senior management role or executive role like you who would say, no, we're not spending time doing OS level patches. We're focused on the product. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to get it in your words, how you think about that, and why you don't specifically go to your team and say, hey, did y'all apply patches this week?
I mean, that's going out there on a limb there, really. Like, maybe I just did that, and I mean, you said a lot of things that I feel like could all be so controversial in some sort of way. There's the thing of, yeah, I know. It's just there's the thing about testing and how you allocate time. Maybe I'll start like this. I was very fortunate because I started really getting into professional work I graduated in 2010, but I've been doing stuff a bunch of years before that. A couple of my close friends and graduate students at the university were starting their own companies, and I was helping with them doing that. So I got a very early guys there. But then I went into a big company, a pretty big one to start, and then another big one, not like Fortune 500, not like Google or Fang, Mango, whatever you want to call them. But there was different ideas being passed around. It wasn't just do the work. Agile was actually new. DevOps, the term was new, and we hadn't heard it yet. And so really my whole career is sort of like I started with these ideas as they were fresh, and then they sort of, I rode the wave, I guess. So I have a very different perspective on it than, say, someone that's working much longer, who's sort of seen what happens before the terms. And maybe he said, oh, we were always doing that. We didn't need a term to catalyze the change. And then now, where I feel like there's this joke about how things come in, like fads come back around every 20 or so years. What is old is new again. When I started working at the place where I learned about DevOps, there was a release engineering team. They had graduated from a platform engineering team before them, and they were responsible for taking the code, the built packages of software that we built for Windows, really, Windows Server 2008, I think is what we were running at the time, and deploying them to production machines. They ran the Network Operations Center, the NOC, to make sure that the production machines were all up and running, because of course we had physical data centers in the production facilities where it was actually running. It wasn't on site where the development team was, but they were spread in a bunch of different locations. And part of my responsibility after being there for a few years was to, I won't say quote unquote, but basically replace them with automation. And that meant converting what we had to, at the time, was using Puppet, which there were a lot of questions being asked, like, why are we doing this using a Ruby-based convention when we were a Microsoft C# shop originally? And it was a good question, because after that you learn the lessons of, wow, the clouds have like CloudFormation and AWS, and Terraform wasn't a thing yet, but after Chef and Ansible, a real change happened there. So I have my own views on that. And for me, DevOps became this idea, really, as I understand it, that if you build it, you own it. And that's every single step of the cycle, from all the way before, doing the customer research to the design, development, testing, turning around and figuring out what the infrastructure should be, deploying it to some place, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, managing it, monitoring it, getting alerts, production, on call, have you, all the way to retirement. And that means shutting it down and deleting stuff, database management, et cetera. And that there are other teams that are in these larger organizations that you may be in that are there to help you on your way, right? Like you're not going to be the expert in all of these different aspects. It's sort of what we mean when we say T-shaped individuals. So you have a good breadth on your cross-functional team, but there's some area that you're an expert in. So there may be someone who knows more about testing and knows more about automation of infrastructure, CI/CD. So I think the question I'm going to pop out that you basically asked is, what do I do about that patching, story there? So, I mean, realistically, I hope the team says, wow, we really don't want to have to patch things. It is our responsibility to make sure that we don't have a security incident or that we're using the latest stuff. So that means if we are using a virtual machine, we're accountable for that. And maybe there are teams out there or really products, given the small size of the company, to help us. We leverage cloud providers and serverless technology as much as possible so that we don't have to end up in that situation. You pay attention to some alerts and maybe you're good. And that's sort of how we get away from it, because they know that anything they build, they're going to be responsible for, and they're going to get asked the question, hey, are we using a distribution that has XC running or Log4j? Is that going to affect, if maybe not our own technology, but are we running Elasticsearch, or are we using a managed version, et cetera?
Yeah, and I'm happy to hear you say that answer, because that aligns with, like I alluded to earlier, I've kind of shaped my opinion over the last few decades with this. And I think that restating that another way is, like, from your perspective at the top of the organization, you just assume that those things are happening. Like, you're not going to specifically walk up to your team and say, hey, did you see this latest patch? Are y'all going to install it? You just assume that they're doing that. And the analogy I always use to this is, like, let's say you're going to the hospital and you tell the doctor, I need my appendix removed. You just happen to know that for whatever. Work with me on this analogy here. You go in and you request to have your appendix removed. So your assumption there is that after the surgeon removes your appendix, that they're also going to sew up the incision so that you're not just laying there bleeding out. And I think that same assumption happens in software and engineering organizations. Like, you don't ask for that because you just assume that that's happening by default. And if it's not, well, that's a separate conversation. But from the individual hands on the keyboard role type people, don't freak out and don't get paranoid when your CTO doesn't call out that you're 2 patches behind and open up a ticket for you. They're just assuming that you're taking care of that.
Yeah, I mean, I like your analogy really there. I like to think of it as a spectrum. Like, on one side, there's full micromanagement of, I know exactly what version of every operating system we're using and whatever library versions and package versions. I for sure do not. And then there's the other side of the spectrum, which is I don't even get involved in these conversations whatsoever. And I'm not there either. There are sort of things like, oh, how do I know we're doing the right thing? Right. So there has to be some sort of visibility into what we're doing, or some sort of metrics that help us understand here. And there are tools we use AWS. So there's things like Guard Duty, and I mean, CloudTrail doesn't help here, but there's a Security Hub that integrate with third-party tools that help us understand where we're at. Because obviously we're not going to know the answer to what version, like which patch version should we be on, is actually a difficult question to answer. Does this vulnerability or CVE that was just discovered 0-day, does it affect us? So that's a difficult question to answer. And so I could say, yeah, for sure, we are up to date with everything. But what is that? I don't know. Here are our heuristics on how we sort of figure that out and go to town.
So you're telling me that you don't have the package.json file memorized for your primary application?
I mean, so the first thing is we are using TypeScript for a fair number of things. So of course we have UIs. there's definitely a bunch of fields in there that I still have no idea how they work. I couldn't tell you what the list is. Yeah, for sure not. I do know that, tools like PMPM with verifiable hashes of the libraries is super critical to prevent security vulnerabilities rather than like you can't live with just whatever package version file you've got. So package JSON in JavaScript and for NPM and NuGet or the CS proj file in C#, et cetera, et cetera. There's always a lock file equivalent that contains hashing information that allows you to ensure that the version that you're deployed in production is static. So like it doesn't change build to build, is immutable builds, which I think is really important. But also, if something happens to that package and it becomes malicious in some way, you're not installing that in your next version. Someone can't just swap it out on the fly, which I think was actually a vulnerability in the PyPy package management repository up until not long ago. I think they supported hashing versions, but like no one did it or something like that.
Right. So y'all are you're still an early stage startup, right? Over at Authorus. Right.
I don't like using the term startup. I think that's sort of orthogonal to the size. Yeah, for sure we're small.
Gotcha.
We're under 20 people total. I think there's something about there being a product market fit, not alignment, or you're doing the research to identify what your customers may want. I think what we'll see is a lot of successful companies that are really successful at one or two people. And I feel like AI's enabled that. I feel like the number of tools and specialization of products and SaaS and third-party stuff out there helps that. There was a great article that I read recently that something like the time zone database is managed by like two people primarily. SQLite, which is used by like every single device in existence, has 3 maintainers. So like, I find it ridiculous to me when a company comes and says, hey, we have 55 people to support StreamYard. I don't know how many people they have. Right. Like, because it's a couple of UIs and a backend service and maybe an integration with a few things. Like that doesn't take that many people. I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree 100% with that. Like not every application needs people to scale. But the thing I wanted to drill in on there was, as a small company, how do you approach DevOps? Do you have a specific DevOps team, or do you even talk about DevOps?
At this point, we don't really talk about it because everyone sort of knows what the responsibilities are. And when we hire, we make it clear that you're responsible for the whole application, whatever that means, all the way to making sure that the customer is happy with the product that they get. And if they're not, then we make sure we're asking for feedback, and that's on everyone. You handle support tickets, etc. And so along with that comes this idea of ownership, which I think is very well aligned with DevOps, which for me is really who owns it in production? Well, it's the team owns it. There's not a developer, there's not an operations person. It's the team that owns the application running. This is the combination of the mindset. And so it doesn't just stop there for us. You also own the reliability and the performance, and like I said, how people are happy. So we're filtering that out during the interviewing stage, whether or not people are likely going to like that, or whether or not they want to say, yeah, I don't want to do that. That's not my job. I think people have to be okay with ownership. They don't have to be the expert though, right? Each team there's about 5 people. So realistically, you have partners to help you. You have colleagues that will be deep in different areas. So someone will know how exactly our GitLab pipelines are set up for deployment, what exact tools we're using, and they will help you that. You don't have to memorize every single line of code. For sure, I don't know what is going on everywhere. I don't expect every engineer to know either. So we don't have a DevOps team for sure. And when someone says we've got a DevOps team, I always am like, well, how does that work? That's like having a separate QA team. You've siloed your knowledge. And I think we've learned through the history that if you have siloed teams, then you have silos that aren't interacting in that way. So for sure, whatever the QA team writes will be high quality, but not the code that the development team writes. And if a different team is managing infrastructure and deployment, then there's a question of ownership and responsibility, which makes it more complex when there's a potential downtime or production incident, who should be paged and respond to that problem.
yeah, there's a bit of irony there. Like we use DevOps to break down silos by building a new silo. Wow.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I
Good
don't,
job.
yeah, I know, right? There is something that I've been wrestling with personally recently, and that's at some growth scale, there's this idea where specialization needs to come in. Like we got to 8 billion people on the planet because we were able to specialize in some way. Not everyone knows how to grow potatoes, which for the record is incredibly easy. If you throw them in the ground, they pretty much just, I mean, they grow in the bag if you leave them in your kitchen. I mean, it may not work out that well for the record. And like, if you wait too long and stuff happens, they can become poisonous if the green flowers start to sprout and stuff like that. But it's not as bad as old rice. So I think realistically, there is this question that I need to answer, which is, what does specialization look like here? And for us, rather than split it horizontally, which is like this layer is the development, this layer is the testing, this layer handles the infrastructure, which I think we've realized, oh, the domain-driven approach is better for software architecture. Don't have presentation layer, business logic, database. It should be this way. It's the same way that we set up our organization. You own everything from potentially the UI all the way to the database layer, and that includes deployment and production. And then you split vertically. So instead of the scope is less, you own every part of the stack, but it's a smaller stack, a smaller footprint.
Yeah, and that goes back into like the T-shaped skills that you were talking about there. So in a given team, everyone is responsible for the application from end to end, but that doesn't mean that everyone on that team understands every component of it. Within that team, you'll have people who are stronger in the back end, and other individuals who are stronger in the UI layer, and other individuals who are stronger in the deployment operations of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, in almost every company I've been in, there's been someone on one of my teams that was also a full stack hipster. And I mean, you want someone who actually goes and researches new technologies and be like, hey team, we should use this. I mean, you should, maybe take a second and be like, okay, but should we use it? Because if you didn't do that, then you may have ended up with WebAssembly, in your stack early on, when it really doesn't make sense. But on the flip side, you do need people pulling in new ideas. So there is someone, like, you think about not your team, but think about what you want to deliver in your organization or in each of your teams, and think about, how do we get that? And maybe it's 5 people that are all great in Ruby on Rails, but realistically, it's probably not. It's probably a couple people who really know the framework in and out, someone that understands the deployment automation, someone that's really detail oriented, someone that likes working with customers, getting feedback. And I look at it like this. If you have a support rotation at your company, everyone that goes through the support rotation is going to probably get woken up at some point, and they're going to have to triage what's going on. Well, hopefully, they're probably going to have to fix it too in a short period of time. And so that means they need some skills, some understanding, some knowledge of how that works, and also wanting to jump into it and not trying to resist that the problem, trying to not take ownership of it. And that means that realistically, they have to be given ownership, they have to be given responsibility, but also, let them free roam. And from that standpoint, that means everyone on your team is going to have to be similar in some way, but for sure, you don't want carbon copies.
Gotcha. And by that approach, you're also kind of like setting the stage there to limit the scope of the things that they're responsible for, so that it's a manageable domain, right? You're not going to have a team that's like, they'll be responsible for their application from end to end, but they're not going to be going on call to be first responder on applications they've never seen with deployments they've never seen, right?
Yeah, no, for sure not. I mean, whatever is in the scope of the team comes down from first the team identity that we set. So whenever there's a team change, a new person joins, we reevaluate the team identity for that team, what they're really charged with, what the deliverable is for the organization. And then they settle on that, and everything drives from that. So if they want to have high support, if they want to have high quality, reliability, et cetera, then they bake that in, and that's how that team works. So a part of that is understanding how those applications run. Obviously, so there's also an encouragement. Hey, I don't want to be the fundamental only person responsible for this piece of software because I don't want when someone else is on call, I don't want to sort of also have to be on call. So disseminating knowledge becomes
The shadow call.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, some people love it. I guess maybe. I mean, I've been in organizations where like that's how it goes, right? Where like everyone's on call at the same time, or I don't really know what's going on. And I've been in those situations personally early on in my career. And I honestly, I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. You're asking me to validate data in an application that I have no idea how it works. Even if I did that, what happens if there's a problem? Like, what am I supposed to do? Realistically, who am I going to call? And there's no magic DevOps Ghostbusters running around that will solve all your problems for you.
So how do you approach, so we've got the individual team here that's responsible for that end to end, but then there's also like some common, across the teams, there's common services and infrastructure there. So how do you address those, like deciding on which, from a really large level, like whether you're going bare metal or GCP or AWS, and who are you using for logging and monitoring and things? How do you approach those problems?
There are for sure some that I've sort of put my foot down and said, we're definitely using this and not that other thing. I think that one was, we're using AWS. There's some things we're debating on using in GCP. We don't use Azure. And that's just, I mean, I get in that conversation, but I mean, I think there's some things that I am fundamentally responsible for. So I'm looking out further in the future, which companies or partnerships, third parties that we're using are aligned with our own way of thinking that align great with it. I think there's a lot of talk in the observability space. I think if we got a lot more requests in and we had a need to dive a lot deeper, like I would probably look at Honeycomb first. Because I like the idea of someone reinventing the space and getting away from legacy. Now, I don't know if Observability 2.0 is just marketing or whether or not there's something there, but there's this idea of wide data structures for tracing. And we actually do that in our applications. We start an object, a metadata context object, and as things happen, we append to it. And if everything works out in the end, like thumbs up, we throw away the data, never log it. And if something bad happens, then we've got tons and tons of things related to the request. And this is incredibly easy to do. You just mash stuff together and you can regret your decisions later. And it hasn't been a problem. So, I mean, some of those things definitely lie on me. Other ones, like I don't care, and the team can sort of go in whatever direction they want, given some amount of money or some particular problems. Like it's not such a big deal there. I think, unfortunately, we do end up building some things ourselves just because we're in a space where we're sort of promising privacy and security to our customers and convenience, most importantly. And that means we are not going to send their data to particular third parties without first really thinking long and hard about what that data is and whether we can do that.
That's kind of off topic, but that's something I really want to dig into because I spend probably more time than I should thinking about this whenever it comes to using SaaS platforms. Like the thing that I keep thinking about over and over is like, it's so easy to just say, hey, we're going to use a SaaS, and you integrate with them. But that SaaS is going to get hacked. 100% guaranteed. They will experience a data breach at some point. And so what happens to your customers because of the decisions that you made to use that SaaS? And the way I see this is like the best that you can hope for in most cases is to get an @ mention on Twitter from that company's CTO. But that does your customers no good. So how do you decide which SaaSes, how do you vet out a SaaS before you decide to use them?
Yeah. And I think we use a lot of different metrics than what I've heard. Like size is not important. Like how long they're going to survive is not important for us. Those things, like I don't care about. I don't care if a company is run by one person, honestly, unless even if the data is critical. Because if we look at the metrics, like everyone will get hacked, and the size of the company is totally irrelevant. The amount of revenue they make is totally irrelevant. The number of people, not relevant. So it's like none of those metrics actually make sense there. What does make sense is like our ability to recover from that more so than anything, and our own metrics on whether we think they're secure. So an example is like, how do they do with it? Like we do authentication. How are they doing authentication? That's something we know. So what does that look like to us? And if they've got like passwords enabled in their UI and like no federated providers and whatnot, like that's going to start giving us some concerns. If they don't have granular role-based access control, like we can't fine grain who has access to what, like that's going to give us some concern. We look at the documentation, how clear it is. We look at the quality of it. Does the APIs make sense? Can we glean into the company really and understand what they're about in the direction that they're going? Fundamentally for us, it's about shared mindset. So does the world that they think about match the world that we think about? And that's very difficult to understand by just looking at the marketing page or even the features. Like none of those things matter. Any information that you're using today to make a decision on whether to buy a SaaS is like probably the wrong stuff, because it's very difficult to go and really glean into, are they a good match for you? But I feel like that's really the most important thing. And so like if you have a billing question or a support question and you reach out to their support, how quick are they to respond? And not necessarily speed, but like the right answer that's relevant. And if they're giving you the wrong answer, then you have to wonder, well, like, what if this was a critical problem? How long would it take for us to actually get support here? I'm always suspicious when I get redirected to a third-party bug bounty program to report, security issues. I mean, in some ways it's great, but in other ways it's, well, that's just another step I have to go through to actually report that there's a problem. How seriously are they taking security? And so these things are difficult to figure out without actually sort of experiencing them either previously in your life or, having a sort of second sense about them, third sense, I don't know, sixth sense, how many senses do we have? I know it's like 26 now or something. So the 27th sense about, I have the sense, it's a magic power that will tell me whether or not I want to use a SaaS provider. I use my internal feelings, a bit of empathy about how they're building it. It used to be that there's like a mark on the bottom of the page that says made with love from wherever. And I'm like, okay, there's just a time where all the web pages just say that now. And I'm like, okay, like I don't know. I don't know if I think that's a good thing or not.
No, but is there like a love.js plugin that you can use so you can automatically say your website's made with love?
So this is how bad it is for me. My first thought when you say that is, oh God, I hope the tld.js doesn't exist. like there's a security issue there if like people are going to .js and like putting that in their browsers and then getting to a website that's some phishing link, right?
Right.
And like that's where my thoughts went initially. Like oh, please no. I mean, it was so bad that for April 1st this year, Google released the .exe domain as a joke. Yeah. Because the previous ones they released were .mov, which was a mistake, and I think there was another one too that they got a lot of hate for.
But bringing it back, negative publicity is still good publicity.
I guess really if something happens with one of our vendors, that's a problem. Think about what you would want our reaction to be for you. Some email. I mean, we use Discord to communicate out to our customers when there's an issue that we think is a problem. So maybe that's what you hope for. I mean, realistically, you just want to go back in time and be like, why did I ever use Authris? Because one of their vendors has a problem. I mean, we look at the stats, like something's going to happen. So we try to be careful. I think that's the most anyone can do. There are some frameworks out there for certifications that you can believe in, but there is mostly checkbox-based security or insurance-driven. Sure. Yeah, it's about just to set the record straight here. If anyone thinks that SOC 2 or like ISO 27001 and the associate other ones are security-based, like throw that away. It is only about putting a logo on your marketing webpage to convince customers to buy your product. You can absolutely get those and not remotely be secure.
For sure. It's a tax required to get a stamp on all of them. And that's like, that may be interpreted as a controversial statement, but anyone who's ever gone through one of those audience, in the back of their mind, they're going, yeah, he's kind of right about that.
I mean, there's this aspect where obviously there's publicity around these companies that get popped. And if you go and look, they have those certifications. So we know the ones that don't, who are also not that big to be public or of any merit to talk about, are also having issues. The data may not be that critical or that important, but the ones that are getting it aren't necessarily faring any better. So, I mean, what's the bottom line here, realistically?
Well, the bottom line is bringing this back around to how you approach DevOps.
Yes.
How do you measure how effective you are? Like, what are the things from the CTO role? What are the things that you look at to say, you know what, I think we're doing all right? Because there's like there's just an unlimited number of things you could be looking at. Which ones are you choosing to look at, and why?
Okay, I'm gonna have to go look at my GitHub page where I actually posted a list of like the metrics that I like care about, because there's a lot of these and I don't like pay super close attention. I think the first important thing is there's no magic percentage or number or point system where like 10 is good and 5 is bad, or one is terrible. Like that doesn't exist. I think there's a getting better over time. So whatever you want to measure, just make sure that the stat isn't increasing in some way. For me, it's the number one thing I care about is priorities. And I care that we're spending less time over time working on fires or critical incidents, anything like that. And the severity of those goes down. So that's what I look at. How many incidents do we have over a period of time, and how bad are they? I think that's a pretty good metric because that has a direct impact to the business and also what you can do something about it from a technical standpoint. There was a joke I read recently that was like, if you try hard enough, every single incident can be stopped by if you had the right test. Like, tell me an incident where you couldn't have, it could be difficult to write the test, but there's no incident that's like, if you didn't have a test, well, it could happen. And if you have the test, there's some way to detect it and potentially prevent it. But on the metrics though, so that's some of them. I care about innovation a little bit, enough so that it is happening. So that's one thing for me. And I look at that using free capacity. So if the business needed to pivot in a small part of the product or for a new customer, how long would that take to start working on that and get that done? And I don't mean like I care about the individual velocity of that happening. From an agile standpoint, we do the most important thing first, then the second most important thing, and then the third most, and then reevaluate. Do we still want to keep going? Did we capture the value or not? So are we able to do that? Or do I get pushback that, hey, we're spending time on tech debt or whatever it is? In which case, I want to see the numbers on that. Like, how much time are we spending on tech debt? How much time are we spending on support tickets? I can tell you we've got like 2 support tickets per day. I don't know if that's the actual number, but it's something like that. And that number is important for me because as that number increases, that means more of my team's time is going to be dedicated to solving those problems. And the next question I'm going to ask is, well, what are we getting support tickets on? Like, is it a documentation problem? And for sure, it's never a documentation problem because we know people don't read documentation.
That's fair.
I like when I'm trying to figure something out, like today we were trying to improve some of the billing invoices we send out. And I was looking at the docs to be like, okay, can we include some of this information here? I think it's important for our customers. And I'm looking at it and I'm looking at the APIs and some of the documentation. I'm like, I can't figure it out. So, that's a question I sent out to our payment provider. And of course, I immediately get back an LLM response of, did you mean this? And I'm like, no, I did not mean that.
Right. Cool. So it sounds like you approach it kind of like sailing. We're trying to go directionally that way, and based on how the breeze is, we might have to go this way a little bit and then cut back this way. But as long as we're generally heading that direction, that's what we're looking for. And
you got it.
Yeah. And I think one of the I think one of the things that's hard to wrap your head around is keeping that mindset while you're as a practitioner involved in the daily grind,
Yeah.
and looking at here's the list of tasks that are assigned to me. Here's the technical implementation details to get those. And it's hard to just take a step back and say, oh, you know what? We gotta keep going this direction here. So how do you keep the lines of communication open with your teams to try and help them with that?
Yeah. So I think I'd be remiss if I didn't include, at least in the previous conversation, saying something about the Dora metrics.
Right.
This is the thing I sort of forget, where like some things are so obvious that I'm just like, I don't even think to say it. Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's obviously the problem of you get what you measure. And the thing with the Dora metrics are, the outcome is not bad. Like, for sure, smaller pull requests is great. Less issues is always better. I don't care if you're hiding them in some way, or making sure they don't show up. But,
closed is closed.
Yeah. So I think the transparency is super important. And I know that I rub some people the wrong way because I'm incredibly transparent. I don't think that I joked previously that I don't know that the CTO is a title role that people should have, or if it is, it stands for Chief Therapy Officer.
Right.
And it's because like I'm not somehow more technical than any of the other technical people in my company, and we offer a really technical product. I'm not making necessarily better decisions in some way. I look at it as really fundamentally my responsibility is figuring out how to make the organization do better in some way. And I take myself out of the picture and look at the whole organization and be like, okay, what do we actually need? And a lot of times that may be messaging or communication or alignment. And so we have like an OKR-like process. We just call it initiatives, which is every quarter. And then we drill that down and teams meet every week and discuss sort of like a planning session. We don't do Scrum. And then they talk about the initiatives that they want for the week and then how that aligns with the OKRs that we have and what they should be doing there. And then at the end of every month or so, there's sort of feedback in both directions, either, publicity to the rest of the teams. Maybe it's release notes in one of our portals for one of our products that shows what they've been doing. If people care, getting the right messaging to the right people. I don't really like spam. So it's of course a problem of visibility. So there's the question of, what should actually be visible and whatnot. But I think that's an important aspect that everyone should be charged with. That means pushing down the information to where the decisions are being made. This is fundamental agile, realistically, in delegation when you have autonomous teams. So I need to figure out what individual team members need to have so that when you're working on a ticket, how that impacts the business and why you even want to do it. And not just like, well, it's in some product strategy roadmap somewhere, but like which OKR key result will go up or down if that's the direction it should go by working on it. And it goes the other way too, right? I usually put promotion in front of people, which sounds terrible, but realistically, if you want to be promoted, align the goals of the company with the promotion, where they're going. And that may be them extending their career and getting further. So, hey, you're a senior engineer and you want to get to staff engineering. And these are the things we need that would be bigger scope for you. What would that look like to start working on it? And so that's sort of like the reverse direction. Hey, I'm working on this. You want to tell people because that's how people find out about the good work you're doing. Unfortunately, doing good work isn't sufficient to automatically getting promoted.
For sure.
Which is an unfortunate truth I had to learn very, early on in my career. I had hoped I could become successful by just doing good things. And I'm sure some of you out there are pretending not to hear that. Good for you. Good for you, honestly. You'll be happier that way because otherwise you're beholden to what your direct engineering manager thinks or some ridiculous CTO somewhere that you never even talked to.
Yeah, right. No, that's a really good point. Like the higher you go in your career, like the more you have to think about how your work moves the business forward. And I hate using that phrase because
I know.
I feel like I should go wash my mouth out with soap.
You've said
Like,
you said dirty thing.
I did. But like, you've got to make sure that the things that you're doing make your company either generate more revenue or lower expenses. And if it's not doing like one of those two things.
So to be fair, there is another category here, right? It really depends on what what you charge the mission of your company with. For instance, it could be sociopolitical or environmental, right? In which case, either of those may not be the metric for the company, but for sure it's something. Yeah, 100%.
Cool. Yeah, and that's I think that's really hard for those of us who do just like totally geek out on technical stuff. You know, we want to be extreme. We want to be like the resource for some technical thing, and that has limited career paths.
Yeah, I mean, there is this thing where like, oh, can I become whatever is above senior principal engineer? Maybe it's like scientist or something. I mean, most people are not going to get that. Like, it really takes it's like how many people get a PhD, right? You could definitely go and get that, but most people don't want to go there. And I feel like there's a difference with academia and in the private sector professionally, whereas you can just sort of do more, I feel like, in academia and get further. Whereas I feel like you actually need to have a bigger impact for getting further in your professional life, which is a ridiculous comparison, really. It's like, well, you can get this scientist if you win the Nobel Prize. And like, how many people do that? Well, not a lot. So there aren't going to be that many scientists. And so if you start thinking on that scale, you may see some level that you're only going to get to if you only focus on the core engineering aspects.
Right.
That for sure is the case, unfortunately.
Yeah, agreed. All right, cool. That was all the questions I had. I'm done grilling you.
Oh no, I was just expecting there to be so much more things here, and now I'm trying to figure out. Like, I feel like we totally missed some things that everyone is dying to have answers to in this space. I think when we hire people on this, I think the important aspect is you're not an engineer. Like, yeah, you're an engineer. That's what you're doing realistically, but it's because the problems that are falling in your scope are likely solved by some sort of engineering. But fundamentally, your job isn't to write code. It's not to figure out how to move architecture components around or deploy infrastructure. There's some business problem that you want to be motivated to actually solve. Like, that's the real reason that you're there working at that company. You want to make that happen. And I hope that a lot of people are saying, well, I don't want this feature request that came in, that seems wrong. Because if you're not able to say no sometimes, that means you're not really making a decision on what makes sense for the business and or via the product, via the service you're working on, and what doesn't. And if you're not making that, then you're not adding a terrible, huge amount of value. You're doing some rote work, which is maybe the equivalent of filling in a spreadsheet, data entry over something else. And I think those are the jobs via LLM that are going to be problematic because you're not actually doing the decision making. And like, this is an interesting aspect where you said when you get higher up in your career, and I actually feel like I want to talk about that because I do feel like I'm at the bottom more than the top. Like, I'm supporting the organization rather than like the decisions I make come rolling down. And I really like this support analogy more. I think historically people have called it like servant leadership, but I don't like that. I think it's just, fundamentally, I have to support the most people. And whatever they're doing. And that means that realistically, the people that are delivering for the business are at the top. All the engineers and the leads across all these teams are actually doing the work to make the business successful. And so if I want the business to be successful, I need to support them to actually do it. And what does that mean? What do they actually need to make that happen?
Yeah, for sure. And higher up is definitely a weird phrase to use. I think what I was really trying to hint at there is that I've been doing this for a long time, and like, it's some like self gratification, like, surely to God, after 3 decades, I'm doing something more than when I got started. Please tell me that's true. But then also like referring to like salary, like I want to make more money, and then you reach a point where you're like, dude, I can't believe they're paying me this much.
It's interesting you say that. There was an interesting Veritasium, which is a YouTube channel that I'm gonna call out here. I actually particularly like it, and it was on happiness and how money affects it. And the interesting thing is that it used to was thought that like at some magic number you don't care about money anymore. But the interesting thing was that the happier you are, the more money you make at that level of happiness, the even more happier you will be. So if you are like right on the level of enlightenment and you start making more money, that will have a huge impact for you. But if you're unhappy, then no amount of more money will make you happier.
That's like the meme. Money doesn't make you happy, but I've never seen a sad guy on a yacht.
Yeah. I mean, there's unfortunate truth there, honestly.
Yeah. True story. Yeah, but no, like you said, like there's a balance there of doing something that you enjoy doing and getting rewarded for it. And I think that's like a worthy career pursuit.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be careful though, because in the position I'm in, that means I'm delegating a lot of really interesting activities. And I think there's a correlation here between how much fun and enjoyment someone gets out of a technical challenge and, inverse correlation, and how important it is for the business. Which is like super unfortunate, right? Yeah. Like the businesses that have the most bored engineers will be the most successful. Like it's and I don't really know what that is. It's sort of a hypothetical I've got, right? Like, you've abstracted away all the complexities of your business via third-party tools or providers, and you pretty much push the button, or you push the butter. That's all you do, and that means you're the most successful. Because if you have to do complex things, well, first of all, why do you have complex problems to deal with? That's a question that should be investigated. And the result is that the business is now relying upon solving a complex problem, which, I mean, I don't think businesses overall are super complex here. But there's actually a corollary for me here, because not only am I not doing the fun technical things, if I do find some fun work to do, I'm delegating it off to someone else. And so there's a real risk of burnout for me, because I'm only then doing the things that no one wants to do in some way, right, or has to get done. And that's been like a super danger in the last 6 to 8 years, I guess, of my leadership and CTO career, really. I know my CEO also suffers with a similar concern as well because of her nature. And I don't want to rule this out. Like, you will have to find opportunities for pet projects. I maintain a bunch of open source things. I don't know if this is good. I write a lot of blogs. I'm on a podcast. I do conference talks. I don't know if any of those are like actually fulfill me for real, right? I think that, some of them are really entertaining. I love talking on this podcast. I think it's absolutely great. Will, thank you, for the invite here. It's been absolutely fantastic.
No, I've loved having you on here, and it's been a lot of fun. But yeah, anything else? Any final thoughts on how you think about and approach DevOps for the practitioners?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you disagree with me even a little bit, definitely call me out somewhere on, I don't know, LinkedIn or one of the Discord communities I'm in. I'm happy to go back and forth on it. It's great. I love it. I love helping people, mentoring them, etc. So, or just a philosophical argument, would definitely appreciate it. It gives me a lot of entertainment.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Cool. Well, in that case, let's move on to picks. So I promised to come with a not lame pick this week, and I feel like I have delivered. So you're probably familiar with on YouTube reaction videos, and there's all kinds of varying quality of those. I've actually been watching some recently of people who have never listened to rock or heavy metal reacting to it. And there's one that's it just cracks me up. I've probably watched it a dozen times because It is so funny. It's this kid named No Life Shack. And the video is his reaction to Leonard Skinner's Freebird. So if you're not familiar with Leonard Skinner, they're a classic Southern rock band, and Freebird is like an anthem in the classic rock area of music. And it's just, I think it's like a 7-minute song where the last 3 minutes are just guitar solos, but so go check out this video. We'll put a link in the show description. No Life Shack reacting to Leonard Skinner's Freebird. His reaction to it, he's got a hip hop and rap background. That's the music he listened to growing up. And so this was one of his first exposures to music outside of that. And it's just freaking hilarious.
One of the lucky 10,000. As a reference to for anyone who doesn't know, XKCD Randall Munroe, there's a great article about how to encourage insightful and motivation into learning new things. And lucky 10,000, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's amazing. I remember I think getting into rock early on. I think mine was Queen. I had a special place for rock opera. I don't know what about it particularly interesting, but I think vocalists on Freddie Mercury, absolutely fantastic.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. What'd you bring for picks this week?
Yeah. So I got 2 because I didn't want to be lame. That's next week. I won't be here. I will be at DevOps Day Zurich. As I mentioned before, authors will be there, and my CEO will be giving a talk on the ROI of security. And my second one is, I mentioned it this podcast already. I really shout out to Veritasium on YouTube channel. It's absolutely great. Mathematical insights, philosophical insights, electrical engineering. It's if you ever got enjoyment being nerd sniped or going on Wikipedia and just reading one article after another one, you will get stuck for days watching these fantastic videos.
Right on. I'll check that out. It sounds like something right up my alley.
My favorite one is there's a hole at the bottom of math.
Oh no. All right. I'm going to go check that one out. Cool. All right, Warren, thanks for joining me.
Yeah,
thanks
of course.
for talking this out with me, getting a little therapy in. Hopefully it was helpful to you if you're listening to the podcast. Although if you're not listening to the podcast, then you probably didn't know that. I just hope that was helpful. But yeah, seems like a good point to wrap this episode up. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see y'all next week. Warren, good luck at the conference next week. Safe travels, and I will see you the following week.
Yeah, sounds good. See you then, Will.
All right. Take care, everyone.